Hello and welcome to another episode. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and I'm excited to be bringing you another female powerhouse so that we can have this conversation around women in power and really start to debunk the myths that are out there and step into and own our power. Now, with me today, I have the lovely Miss Kathleen Booth. Kathleen joined Pavilion as a member in 2019, and we're going to learn a little bit more about Pavilion. I was blown away. And later went on to become a founding co-chair of the Washington, D.C. chapter, a Pavilion ambassador, and today she is the SVP of Marketing and Growth. In that capacity, she leads marketing and sales for the 10,000 plus member global community of go-to-market executives. Prior to joining Pavilion, Kathleen was the founder and CEO of Quintain Marketing, a digital marketing agency. So with that, welcome to the show, Kathleen. I am so excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Sabine. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for thinking of me for the show.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want you to dig into a little bit about what you do today. But before that, walk us through just some of the career milestones or career catalysts that led you to what you're doing today.
Gosh, I've had such I think it's a somewhat unusual career journey. So I'll see if I can try to be somewhat succinct in this. But I started out, I worked from a very young age. I'm the child of both entrepreneurs, people who own small businesses. And so I guess like work was in my bones. And so I've done every job from like short order cook to lifeguard to babysitter to tutor, etc. But when I really started my career, it was living in Washington, D.C. during my time in graduate school. I had studied political science in college and immediately really went into graduate school because the economy was terrible at the time. Nobody was getting jobs. I had a poli-sci degree. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. So I went back and I studied international politics, got my master's, and then I also did an MBA. And that kind of led me down one path really, which was international relations. And it's funny because I studied two different things, right? Like my MBA was in marketing, but my master's was in international politics. And so I had these different directions I could go. And initially I started going down this path of international relations. And so I worked for 10 years actually as an international development consultant. And I specialized in water utility privatization in the developing world. And that was a phenomenal job in my 20s. It took me to over 50 countries, sort of by definition where the water was not very clean. And so I got to explore parts of the world that most people in their 20s may never see. I traveled throughout South America, Central America, Africa, Southeast Asia, a little bit in the Middle East. It was incredible. But what happened was when I wanted to get married and have children, that job was really, really tough to do. And I started realizing that even though I was reaching the place in my career that I wanted to be, that place of success that I had always sought, I didn't have the flexibility on the personal side to do the things I wanted to do, because all of my work in that career was travel overseas for extended periods of time, often alone. So I had a midlife career crisis when I was turning 30. It was pretty early. And actually around the time I met the man who would become my husband, and he similarly was really kind of rethinking what he wanted to do. And at the time he said, "What do you think if we start a marketing agency?" He had been working in something related and I was looking for something new. I had my MBA in marketing. And so we did that. We just kind of like stumbled into business ownership. And again, I think I trace it back to my parents having been entrepreneurs and having seen an example of that. But I will say I didn't have like a grand plan or a business strategy. We just kind of like went and did it. So I spent 11 years as the owner and CEO of a digital marketing agency. I worked with my husband. We're still married, amazingly enough. And it was, I learned more in that time than I think I've ever learned in the rest of my life, just being a business owner. And not, I knew I needed to be good at marketing to own a marketing agency, but like little did I know or think about how much I'd have to really bone up on things like financial management and human resources management and leadership and public speaking. And so it was incredible. And we sold that business in 2017. And since then, I've really worked at a variety of different companies, coming in early stage as the head of marketing, I love early stage. I think it's because I was an entrepreneur for so long. I also advise a number of companies outside of work, and love to kind of continue being involved with early stage entrepreneurs as much as possible, helping them figure out what their marketing strategy should be, building teams, and testing different approaches. So yeah, today I'm at Pavilion, which was really transformative in my career. As you mentioned, I joined as a member in 2019. And what Pavilion is it is a private membership organization for go-to-market leaders and their teams. And go-to-market we define as the CEO, founder, and then marketing, sales, customer success, and revenue operations. And so we like to say that we are the place to go if you are a leader of today or you're trying to become the leader of tomorrow. And so we have more than 10,000 members around the world. About 4,000 of those are executive members, VP level or above. And then the remainder are either CEOs or the people who report to those executive members. And we support our members through community, through education, through in-person connections at events, and through insights and research.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And what an amazing career journey. I think I always love to hear like how people got here. And I love the fact that it's not linear like we're taught in college, right? Like go to school, learn this, and work till you're 65 or whatever age until you're ready to retire. So I love when people detour, if you will. And usually the detours are part of the path anyways. It just leads you to where you're supposed to be. So it sounds like Pavilion, as you were talking, and even as I was doing some research before, you hear about Vistage, you hear about YPO, for like Vistage specifically for like some more established former CEOs of other companies. And so I love the fact that there's this other option for people who are really like, no, I'm just starting the business, I'm just building the business, or the business is at a newer stage, if you will.
Yeah, we do have a lot of members that are in startups, but I would say where we really shine as an organization is in high growth, generally investor-backed companies. And so we have a lot of members who are in companies that have accepted venture capital or private equity owned. And so there's a lot of pressure on them, right? Like whenever you accept investment dollars, the expectations around growth really increase dramatically. And that results in a lot of pressure and a lot of spotlight on those go-to-market leaders because they tend to be the people that are responsible for driving revenue. And so what we found, and this is what drove me to Pavilion in the first place, is it's very lonely at the top, right? Like when I first became a VP of marketing, it's terrifying. Like I always wanted that title, or a CMO. When I finally became a CMO, I always wanted that title. But when you get there really isn't like a degree that you can take in school that prepares you for how to do that job. Yeah. It's no longer about your functional expertise. For example, in my case as a marketer, it's about how you run teams. It's about how you interact with the CEO and a board, and how you build strategies that look beyond just your functional expertise. And so it's terrifying. Nobody wants to learn on the job, especially when the stakes are so high. And unlike other roles, when you're a manager or a director, very often there's multiple of you. And so you have peers you can go to for advice. When you are the VP or the CXO, there's one of you in that role, in your functional area. And so we really serve as like a sanctuary for those people to come and think of it as a group of people who are there with open arms, ready to support you, ready to hear your rants if you have them, ready to reassure you, provide you with resources, give you advice and tools, et cetera. And so it's really about making it less lonely and less scary and helping people feel confident and empowered to succeed in their careers.
Yeah, a community is everything in entrepreneurship for sure. So I'm excited to get into this conversation here around women and power, how we define it, how we relate to it, and how we can really start to embody it in multiple areas or sectors of our society. So as you think about, and I shared this with you before, as you think about the words power, authority, and influence, I'm curious, how do you define those three? And what have been your experiences with them?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And caveat, I did not look anything up in the dictionary. So when you told me you were going to ask me this question about especially power, I feel like it's such a Rorschach test, and in my case, like I have a very conflicting feelings about the word power, especially amongst those three words you mentioned. I would say power, if you like asked me to say the first word that came to my mind when I hear the word power, to me, it's actually control. Because people in positions of power tend to have the resources and the opportunities to control things, whether it's controlling through their money or through their position or, what have you, but there's a degree of control that is implied there. And that control can be, wielded for good or for bad. And so that's definitely like the first word that comes to mind. I think that's the more, I guess, like negative lens through which I see power. But then there's a part of me that's like, boy, wouldn't it be great to have more control? I love control. I'm a control freak. And I think there's a corollary to control, which is opportunity. If you are the person who has the control, you have the opportunity to control things in a way that can be beneficial for you and for others. So I think power is just a really interesting word that has like two different sides to it, depending upon the person who holds it. Yeah. Now, by contrast, influence, or well, let me start with authority. Authority, I would say, to me, implies a degree of expertise and a proven track record. And that then implies that you are somebody whose opinion, whose statements, etc., should be taken, more seriously. There's an element of like gravitas there. And I'm also, full confession, somebody who has a lot of imposter syndrome. And so that I like the word authority more because it feels like something that underneath it all has a greater sense of legitimacy, that it is more earned than power. I think power very often can be granted and not earned, versus authority really has to be earned, which is something that as a woman, I've always felt like I really want that. I really want to be seen as a figure of authority because of my experience, because of my track record, because of the things that I've done to earn that position. And then I guess influence, to me, is the outcome of power and or authority. It's your ability to take that power or authority and use it to, for lack of a better term, manipulate. And manipulate as a word can have very negative connotations, but I just mean like you have the ability to shape things for the better or for the worse. Influence too can be used positively or negatively, and it is the outcome of authority and or power. So that's how I look at those three things.
I love it and fascinating. And I was sharing this with you before, and I've certainly shared it with other guests. This is why I want to have this conversation, because we all, in any given moment, define these three differently. And there's no right or wrong answer, right? So we're all defining it based on our experiences, based on what we've seen. And, as people are listening, they may choose to adopt, the way that someone else sees it, or it might be that light bulb to be like, I never considered that, right? Like, and this is a new way of being. So I'm curious from just from overall, we'll focus on, I guess, power and authority. Would you say it sounds like, based on your definitions, and I love the way that you put it, that power is, or authority is earned, not granted, versus, no, I'm sorry. Authority is power.
You're right. Authority has to be earned. Power can be earned, but it also can be granted.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. So would you say, when you think about where power is sourced from and where authority is sourced from, it almost sounds like your thought process is both are sourced externally?
I don't know. I would say power, well, when I think about them, power can be sourced externally for sure. Like there's a phrase, you are put in a position of power, right? Which implies that somebody has put you there, or some structure or historical pattern or what have you. Like, but you have been, through something that is not entirely of your own doing, you have been placed in a position of power. That is one way to become powerful. Another, then there are people who amass power through wealth, title, things, things along those lines. So there are different paths to power. To me, authority, when I say it has to be earned, and this is just my kind of perspective on it, to me, authority comes about more organically as a result of you developing a level of expertise that is unique and therefore and recognized as unique or somehow exceptional, and having demonstrated that expertise in a way that is objectively measurable. Meaning, like, I think when I think of authority, I think, there are teachers who are authorities on particular subjects, and they've developed an knowledge that the rest of us don't have, and they're able to demonstrate it in the way they teach or the things that they publish. We have pundits who've become experts on topics, and they're recognized for that in the way, because they're able to provide commentary that sheds new light on things. And then there are people like go-to-market leaders, like the people that we serve, who have authority because they've risen through the ranks, they've gotten into their positions. And now it's interesting, as I talk about this, I can see how if you're put in a position of power, people might perceive that as granting authority. But I would say, in my opinion, or at least the way I've always looked at it, authority has to come more organically, because you can be powerful but not authoritative. You can be in a position of power and not respected for it, and not seen as an authority, if that makes sense.
It does. And again, there are no right or wrong answers here. I'm just here to have the conversation and to open the minds of those who are listening to it. So, I am of the belief that power is essentially, while it can be granted, that it is internally sourced in many ways. And what we see as power is the projection, whether it's based on what we've seen modeled. I've shared this on the podcast before, that when we look at it from the power dynamics between men and women, for the most part, society, workplace, you name it, we can see that men exercise power as a form of power over. That is their natural tendency, whereas women, the natural is power with. And so there are different ways in which we exercise power. And so that was the thing that kind of got me to questioning, okay, well then what is power? Like, yes, we demonstrate it differently, but essentially, where is it coming from? And to your point, it can be through position, it can be through someone granting it, but it's almost like love. Like, where does love come from, right? Like, people can show you love, they can demonstrate love, but what is the source of it? We all have it. Where's the source? And so that's kind of like the well, if you will, that I went down when I was trying to define, okay, well, then what really is power? Where do we get it? How do we access it? And if we look out in society and we can see that one group clearly has it, they own it, they express it, they manifest it, they demonstrate it, but another group is struggling, I came to the conclusion that there's something missing. There's something that we don't know. And again, obviously I'm generalizing here, but it's almost like there's something that we don't know, or perhaps that we haven't tapped into, that is creating this imbalance, if you will, of the scales or the opportunity for people to exercise power.
I mean, you raised such great questions and sharing such interesting insights. And, just listening to you talk, where my head started going was different types of power, because like the power I described is very much in reference to your relationship with others. Right. But when I hear you talk, what it makes me think of is a different type of power, which is the power that you have with reference to yourself. And I think, and part of why I think I come at my definition of power the way I do is because there are like historical trends undeniably that have affected the power dynamics of today. And you alluded to things like women, and men exercising power over. That is very much a legacy of a historical framework that we've come from, right? Like there are similar dynamics with race, and other areas. But I think of it with gender particularly, like it always was men were in charge, right? They were the protectors of the women. That was the way society was shaped for many, many years, with exceptions, certainly. But we are still, amazingly enough to me, like battling our way out of that historical dynamic. It's kind of surprising that it's still something that influences, I think, power dynamics today. But like just the fact that we still haven't had a female president of the United States, in and of itself is very telling. And all the discussion that's happened when some have tried. But the other power you reference, the power that which I think of as like the power with respect to yourself, is so interesting because it almost relates to the concept of like ownership. And when you think of ownership, like I once knew someone who defined ownership as you owning your own behavior and thoughts, right? And having nothing to do with the rest of the world, and like looking inwards. And if you are able to control the way you feel and to control your actions, then you have true ownership. And I think it's very similar when you talk about power, because power is subjective in some ways, and if you perceive yourself as powerful, and if that then causes you to comport yourself in a way that is powerful, it becomes something of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like confidence, right? Confidence has to come from within, and confidence and power and ownership, they're all like intertwined in some ways. And so there is very much this dynamic of like, if I believe it to be true, then it is true. If I believe myself to be powerful, then I am powerful. And if I believe myself to be powerful, then I am in control, going back to the first word I mentioned, right? And when I realize that I'm in control, all of a sudden that introduces a new level of freedom with regard to how I operate in the world around me. And it changes the way I look at things and that sort of thing. So it is a very interesting question. Yeah. You got me thinking.
Yeah. Now you understand the rabbit hole that that I went down, and I have been, so to speak. I think I'm coming out of it. But this conversation is exactly why, or the series is exactly why I wanted to have these conversations. And then so something that you said that I wanted to touch upon, and another reason why I wanted to have this conversation, to your point with regards to, just looking at our society. Now, our population, there are more women than there are men, right? So, we look at centuries and maybe millennia where it was always them being more than us, being more powerful, being stronger, whatever you name it. But now we're starting to see the dynamics change where the population overall, there's more women than there are men. A couple other key things that are on the horizon. When you look at what's forecasted in 2030, 2030, most of the boomers who are in positions of power now, whether that be in corporate, whether that be in government, education, you name it, they're scheduled to retire, right? And so that is, or be outside of the workforce. And that is huge for many different reasons, because then it creates a space for people who aren't necessarily in that space or haven't carried that legacy, if you will, to move into positions of power. But also what that does is, since men tend to expire, I believe that's the appropriate word, men tend to expire sooner than women do, then that means that, with that power also came money, as you talked about earlier. So that money then gets transferred into the hands of women. So part of my, again, idealistic reason for having this conversation is that the shift is happening where more and more women are going to move into power. And it's not centuries from now. We're talking about less than a decade from now. And so if we aren't prepared, or if we haven't tapped into, or we haven't even just asked ourselves the question, how do I define power? How do I feel about power? Like, how do I feel about being authoritative, right? Is that something that makes me want to recoil, or is that something that I'm ready to embrace? We don't want to wait until 2030 or 2040 or whatever, where now we have the opportunity, we have the power, the world is our oyster, and they're looking to us, and we are still trying to define who are we, and how can we move into these spaces. And then the other piece too is, they call it generational, right? Like generational patterns. We have the opportunity to break the pattern. The very, very, what do you call it? Masculine, it's power over, it's control, it's all these things. We have this opportunity now to start to shift that narrative, and make it whatever we need it to be for our society, as well as the generations after us. So I just wanted to share that as like a little bit of insight, that yes, we've had an example for a very long time, but now we get to redefine. We get to change the narrative. We get to decide, and women in particular are the ones who hold, if you will, the magic lamp to decide what that future looks like.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. I will say this. The degree to which we're able to step up into those opportunities is going to very much depend on our own abilities to get out of our own way. And what I mean by that is that we have a Women of Pavilion group within Pavilion, and I sort of loosely moderate it, if you will. Like, we do roundtables all the time, and we have conversations about this sort of thing a lot. And both there and within the broader world, what I've observed, and this might be controversial, I don't know, is that very often women are the worst enemies of other women. And, when women speak up and are authoritative, they get labeled by not just men, but by other women as well, as either a bitch or too aggressive instead of confident and authoritative. Like, these labels that we get are really negative when we behave in powerful ways that are commensurate with the ways that men might behave. And it's really frustrating to see that very often it's other women tearing those women down, and women seeing other women as competitive. And I think in fact, I just read something about, and this is generational to your point. I can't remember where I read it, but it was about a woman I know what it was. I was reading an article about female investment bankers, and it was talking about how there aren't a lot of them in that field. And there was an event and with all women investors, and one of them got up and said, when I first started my career, I was the only female on, within the leadership team of my company. And if there was another female, I felt like she was my competition and I had to take her down because there was only space for one of us. And you heard similar things. Interestingly, I think it was Katie Couric who in her book talked about how she wanted to sort of take down, I think it was Diane Sawyer, because she felt like that was competition for her. And so I think as we look at these opportunities that are in front of us with these big changes you talked about, there's a reckoning that's going to have to happen where we look around the room to our left and our right, and we have to realize and accept that other women are and can be and should be our allies and not our competitors. And we need to learn how to communicate with them and lift them up and support them. And that's going to be, I think, an interesting challenge. And I do hope that the generations that are younger don't come with that kind of baggage. But I think a lot of the women that have been able to be successful to date, unfortunately, have had to get there by, in some cases, tearing down other women, which is really unhealthy and unproductive.
Yeah, I totally agree. That piece right there, I gotta figure out a way to tackle that. That is a great point. I mean, I've experienced it. I don't know a woman alive who can't say that they haven't experienced it. Something that as you were talking, and it's a biblical verse, but this is not about Christianity by any means, but it says a house divided cannot stand. And so there's a part of me that questions, why is it that we're made to compete with each other? Why is there, especially at the top spot, why is it so limited? Like, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any ways, but it's almost like, in order for this structure that exists today to exist in the way that it has been, it's almost like it had to create spaces where it was this like feast or famine type mindset, the scarcity, lack mindset within women, so that we would, because that's human nature, right? That we would turn against each other, because for every instance where we can see where like women are being catty or we're treating each other in not so nice ways, when you look at when we come together though, like when we bond, like when we unite, we cause change to happen in rapid ways and in ways that the rest of society is like, what happened? What happened? You look at Me Too. You look at when, just the Me Too movement itself and how like that really dismantled structures that had been there for a very long time that were okay. you go but before that to the suffrage movement here in the US, right? Women getting the right to vote and how that opened the door for Planned Parenthood, that opened the door for so many different things that women now had access to that didn't just benefit women, but it benefited society. And so I think that there is a hidden power, or there is a power that we have not been able to tap into because the powers that be, or the people who are sitting in positions of power, want it that way. If we can focus on, oh my gosh, she has the same dress as I do. Oh no. Yeah, that's a petty example, right? Or, oh my gosh, she's going to go for the same job I'm going for. If we can focus on those things, then we don't see that, oh, wait, if we band together, we can go in, we can command higher salaries and push that door open for the next person.
Absolutely. And at the risk of like veering into political territory, one of the most powerful things that I ever participated in was actually the Women's March on Washington, because I live close to DC, and being there in person and being surrounded by just an absolute sea of humanity of all ages. Like there were older women who had been, protesting in the 60s, and there were young girls. And it was just like, I still get chills just thinking about it. It was so powerful. And the number of people that turned up, I mean, it was unbelievable and incredibly moving. And that was that feeling I had there, which was like, wow, if we can do this, watch out.
Right. And yeah. I'll say this and then I'll move on. I promise. Look at the Great Resignation. And then I'll stop at that one. Look at the Great Resignation. Like that really shifted how organizations looked at their talent. And when you did the research of who was actually leaving, it was women. Why? Because they had to be caretakers. They had to be school teachers. They had to be all these things. And they couldn't carry the loads that they were carrying anymore. They didn't want to carry those loads. And that really affected organizations to the point that they're still reeling and trying to figure out, how do we go back to normal? Yeah. So I just think that there's so much inherent power that we each individually carry. But when we come together and we collaborate and when we're on one accord on whatever mission, we affect change.
Absolutely.
So,
amen.
So with that, as we think about the next generation, right? Because I also think that an obligation that we all have once we've identified or tapped into our own power, or really assessed how we are showing up as it relates to that, is to turn around and support the next generation. Many of us have had to learn some really, really hard lessons, and, really deprogram a lot of messaging. I would like to see that we're making it easier for the next generation. What are your thoughts on some of the things that we can do to help support the next generation?
That's a great question. And in many ways, I think the next generation is so much smarter and more well prepared than we ever were, because like this isn't specific to women, but I look at some of the younger professionals out there today who are refusing to return to the office because they've recognized like their quality of life is so great when they have more say over whether they are in person or hybrid or remote or what have you, but they prioritize their quality of life today. Whereas we were raised to come into the working world and assume that the first 15 years of our careers were going to be like indentured servitude so that we could eventually earn some kind of a prize. They're all about like, no, why should I wait? Why can't I have the prize today? And I really like salute them for having figured that out. But I think, when I look at the women out there, younger generations of women, and again, through Women of Pavilion, I hear this a lot. I think the biggest challenge I hear is them finding their voice. And what I mean by that is, particularly in the working world and even beyond, in places like politics, I talked about women being labeled. When I participate in roundtables of other women, which I do probably twice a month through Pavilion, the thing I hear the most is them feeling like they're spoken over, or they're afraid to speak up, or there's no room for them to talk. And it's interesting because like, I'm somebody who's like I've never had that challenge. If anything, I talk too much. And I probably talk over people too much. And I don't know what to attribute that to, but like, I've just always been that way. And I found myself feeling really sad in calls with women when they say that they don't speak up, they don't participate, whether it's in business meetings or, in politics or whatever the venue is, because these women that I meet are so bright. They have so much to contribute that it breaks my heart that they don't feel in a position to share that with other people, and that other people can't benefit from their wisdom and their knowledge. And so to me, that's like, in my opinion, for me personally, the biggest thing I want to help other women with is how to help them find it in themselves to start speaking up and to have opinions and to not be afraid to share them and to do it in a way that's productive, right? And I'm certainly not the expert in this. Like, while I'm not afraid to speak up, I have a lot to learn about how to communicate productively. But I think, to me, that's the first step, because we really can't affect change if we're not willing to speak up in the first place. It's another thing when you speak up and people don't choose to hear you or don't give credence to what you have to say. I think that's the second challenge, but it has to start with voicing your opinions and participating in dialogues and debates.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I totally agree. Actually, the person who I interviewed earlier, I was sharing with her that has been a theme with the conversations, that, in order to really, for yourself to own your own power, is to own your own voice. And not be afraid to share your opinion. And so there's so much power in exercising our voice. So thank you so much for sharing that. I do want to wrap up because I know your time is precious. First one up, knowing what you know now, based on everything that you've experienced, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself and give her a critical piece of advice, what might that be?
Oh my gosh. It's all going to work out in the end. I mean, I think that's part of it, but also it's really talk less, listen more.
Mm.
Don't allow yourself to get so emotional in the moment of things. Put things in perspective. I wish I had learned earlier in life to tricks like meditation and other tricks like that to control my reactiveness and to be able to like step out of immediate situations and gain perspective on them, because I am somebody who's very passionate. I have strong opinions. I have strong opinions about what's right and what's wrong. And very often early in my career in particular, that would drive me to really emotional gut responses that weren't productive. And I wish that I had the opportunity to just like take a deep breath, slow down, pause, listen, think, and then respond. That would have been an amazing skill to have in my 20s and 30s.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a skill that we should have had in school for sure. And we acquire it when we're ready, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's a good one. And so looking ahead, given all that you're doing right now in creating impact through Pavilion and creating impact just overall, 60, 70 years from now, you're looking back at your life and you're looking back at all that you've done. What do you want the narrative to be?
Oh, I think about this weirdly a lot, actually. And I don't, I hope that the narrative is that I helped others and that I lifted other people up. I've always, from the beginning of my career, the through line of everything I've ever done is that I really, truly do want to make the world a better place. And that sounds so Pollyanna, but, early in my career, when I was working on water utility stuff, it was much more direct and obvious. Like, it's about getting cleaner water to people. And a lot of people would ask me at the time, well, why'd you go into marketing? That seems like a complete change. And yes and no. I mean, this is why I still advise business owners and entrepreneurs, because I love nothing more than helping a business owner be successful and grow their business, not just for themselves, but having owned a business myself and having had the responsibility of issuing people's paychecks and understanding what it meant. Like, if you couldn't make payroll one week, I get that there's a cascading effect that successful businesses can have on that business owner, their family, their employees, the employees' families, the community that business operates in. Like, there is a different kind of triple bottom line at play. And I do feel deeply about making an impact there. But this is also one of the reasons I love my job at Pavilion, is that every single day, like, our whole community is about helping these individual members be successful and build better lives and careers. And And every single day I feel that, and I see the impact of it with the notes that we get from people who are like, I wouldn't have my job if it wasn't for this company, or, this has been the hardest time in my life, and it's so great to have you all here to support me. That is so meaningful. And so I don't need to change the world in a large way. I just want to feel that I have made the world better, even if it's in several small ways, by helping other people.
I love that. I love that. There's nothing Pollyanna about that, because I'm there too. And then lastly, as you think about books that you've read, I see a couple back there. Is there one or a couple that have been pivotal for you in your development?
Oh, this is coming at such a good time, this question. Well, one of the first ones is definitely Kim Scott's Radical Candor. That one taught me how to have tough conversations in a way that was very transformative, and then radical collaboration, which is so great. And it's funny, after I read it, I put like these signs on my wall in front of me, because there were some things that it tells you, like the one sign that I'm looking at was, I'll read it to you. It's directly from the book. It's number 1, recognize signs my buttons are being pushed, like recognize in myself what those signs are. 2, stop talking and start listening. 3, first truth first, which just means like, if I'm in a tough conversation, I should start with like, I need to take a pause because I'm starting to feel defensive, right? 4, no multitasking during meetings. 5, say, tell me more. Like, ask people to explain the why behind what they're saying. So like those 2 books, I would say Radical Candor for how to have hard conversations, and Radical Collaboration for understanding like how to control within yourself those gut responses that I described earlier that can be really unproductive, and how to like pivot and steer yourself into better conversations. I think between the 2 of them are very powerful.
Oh, I love those. I do have Radical Candor on Audible, but it is a pretty long read.
Yeah.
So I keep putting it off, but I had not heard of Radical Collaboration, and we'll be adding that to my Audible.
Two different authors, funny enough.
Perfect. I will add both of them to the show notes. And so for those who are listening, who want to connect with you, who want to learn more about your work and partnering with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
LinkedIn, Kathleen Booth, LinkedIn. I connect with everybody. If you DM me a question or say you heard me on this podcast, I will absolutely respond.
Awesome. With that, Kathleen, thank you so much for this conversation. For those of you who are listening, we will be back next week with another female powerhouse. Send me an email at support@SabineGideon.com. Let me know what ahas you got from today's conversation, how you are shifting your definition of power, authority, and influence. With that, we will talk soon. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.